Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube, and welcome to part 3 of my 3,500 subscriber Q&A series. We got a lot of ground to cover, a lot of great, fascinating topics in this segment, so we're going to get right to it. First question, Sean, what are some examples of pop culture collectibles that have fizzled out that are also graded by reputable third-party grading companies? Well, you guys got to understand, when you look at these markets, you can't look at them just, well, vintage toys are popular, so therefore they're all selling at a high price point. You got to look at the idiosyncrasies of the market. So naturally, there are, just like there are comic books that are not selling at the highs that they once were back in 2004, 2005, there's vintage toys that are graded by AFA that are not selling at the high prices that they once were. The markets are too nuanced to answer that question by and large. What I will tell you, and you're going to get homework in this particular segment, if you really want to learn certain grading companies that went belly up, here's one I'm going to give you. Look up Global Cigar Label Grading Service. Let me say that again. Look up Global Cigar Label Grading Service. Believe it or not, there was a time when people thought cigar labels and getting them graded was going to be the next big thing. So if you Google that, you will see cigar labels encapsulated in thin plastic that have a grade assigned to them. Because at one point in the antiques and collectibles trade, people thought that that esoteric market would develop legs if a third-party grading company came into that market and breathed new life into it. It did not work. And to this day, Global Cigar Label Grading Service is no longer in business. Now let's apply that to other markets. If you look even at CGC, CGC doesn't only grade comic books. They grade trading cards, they grade lobby cards, and they also grade magazines. Well, naturally, the market for lobby cards, movie lobby cards, and also magazines is not as mainstream as trading cards and comic books. So just because an item is third-party graded, please don't make the mistake in thinking that the market is established. That's why a lot of you guys are led to believe that when a new grading company comes onto the scene and starts manipulating the market, you guys know who I'm talking about, and gets involved in the secondary market, you guys sit there and immediately want to argue with me, Sean, that's the next big thing. It has legs. And what is it that I tell you guys? You have to look deeper than that. Is the market being manipulated? Are there market makers operating in that market that are bidding up items without understanding the fundamentals and the consequences of bidding up those items in the market? So it's more nuanced than being able to just say, Sean, just because third-party grading operates in this market, does that mean it's an established market? The answer is absolutely not. So please do not believe in that. Over the short term or even the long term, you will get yourself into trouble in the antiques and collectibles trade from a financial investment standpoint. Next question. Sean, what do you think about vintage clothing collecting, particularly vintage single-stitch pop culture graphic tees? A lot of more esoteric subject-related t-shirts are rare and only seem to go up in value. Be very careful with that assessment. I assure you, there are a lot of vintage t-shirts from the 60s, 70s, and even 80s that have stabilized and also have dropped in value over the years. For the record, I am not a fan of long-term investing in this market because the items that you are investing in are extremely fragile and also speculative. Over time, value, demand, and also just improper storage can render these items almost worthless. So you really have to know what you're doing if you do get involved in this market. Now, if you tell me, Sean, I've been involved in this market 10 years. I know how to properly store these items. I know what precautions to take. I really love these items. It's something I believe I can make money at over the long term. I would tell you, hey, you do you. If it's working for you, I don't want you to change. But just know there are risks to this market, and they do not always go up in value exponentially. Be careful. Right now, a lot of the t-shirts from the 1990s are going up in value, the original ones, because the generation that grew up with them now has disposable income to spend. So people my age in their 40s who grew up in the 80s and 90s, they may want to buy one of those pieces for their own collection, or because they may want to wear it. Now, I don't recommend if you buy these items, you start wearing them because over time, it's going to wear down your investment even more. Obviously, that's common sense. So just be careful if you are playing in that market, please. A lot of risks in that market. Sean, question, my friend. Put them in order. What are the best speculative collectible investments right now? Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, Lego, video games, Funko Pop, vintage toys? Well, let me answer your question. All those markets are extremely speculative. And due to mass-produced scarcity that the manufacturers are using to promote those markets, you can make money in all of those markets at present time over the short term. I would never, ever recommend you go into those markets over the long term unless you're going after vintage, reserve list, Magic the Gathering cards, or vintage Pokemon products, items that really have legs. But the modern era stuff is extremely speculative. So how I'm going to answer this question is all of them you can make money in over the short term. I do not like the market for Funko Pops. You know, if you guys remember back when I launched this channel, like 6 months in, I did a video where I compared Funko Pops to Beanie Babies and called them Beanie Babies 2.0. Well, ironically, for the first 3 months that particular YouTube video was circulating around YouTube, I would always, every week, I would get a troll comment from somebody who was upset and triggered because how dare I compare them valuable Funko Pops to that of Beanie Babies. And they had to leave me a snide remark or a comment that was attacking the video in some way because they couldn't allow their head to wrap around the concept that Funko Pops are not going to be loved by future generations like they are today. In fact, if you look at that market, there's nothing but declines in most of that market. People are no longer making a lot of money in that market over the midterm and the long term. What's happening is short-term speculation is the name of the game, and very few people want to spend a lot of money on those items because now they know, thanks to channels like this and some of the articles that I've written on this subject over time, that these particular items are inherently risky. You must understand, Funko Pop are not good investments, long-term, short-term, or even mid-term. If you can speculate on them, you can make a quick flip on them, you go after them. But to answer your question, all the items you are mentioning are good for short-term speculation if you know the markets. Personally, I like Lego, vintage video games, then I like getting involved in modern era Magic the Gathering products, then Pokemon. So I actually put Pokemon last. I know a lot of people don't like that assessment. There's a lot of people out there that make a lot of money on modern era Pokemon products, but for me, it's something I do last. I'm more into video games, Lego, and Magic the Gathering before I hit Pokemon products. So that's just something that I will tell you from my own standpoint. I hope that helps. Next question. Sean, what are your thoughts on collecting event tickets? Say, for example, a music concert like the Beatles or a championship sporting event like the Super Bowl. Overall, I don't like it. It's too esoteric unless you are going after a very iconic historical sporting event. For instance, if you have tickets from the Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier fight that happened back in 1974, or looking at boxing again, the Evander Holyfield versus Mike Tyson fight that occurred in 1997, those are iconic sporting events. Anything outside that scope, though, just because you have ticket stubs from a Super Bowl does not mean they're going to be a good long-term investment overall. This market is very esoteric. Be very careful if anybody tells you otherwise. You really have to look at the historic significance of the event in question, and that's what's going to determine if it is worth investing in those particular event tickets or not. So just be careful in that market, guys. I'm giving you the best assessment that I can. I know a lot of you like to disagree with that, but I'm telling you that is a very esoteric market. Next question. Sean, don't know if it's been discussed before, but what's your take on PMG graded Disney dollars? Okay, Disney dollars were extremely collected and extremely popular back in the 1990s, also the early 2000s. Today, they are still collected, but they're not as popular as they once were. This is a prime example of a very popular collecting category. For those unaware, Disney collecting in the trade is considered to be a blue chip collectible, and it's called Disney-ana. Now, Disney-ana collectibles from the vintage and coveted antique eras have a lot of value. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that's being produced, hoarded, and collected today is utilizing mass-produced scarcity. Disney dollars are kind of caught in the middle of those two extremes. As a result, there's a lot of people that are trying to go after a complete Disney dollar set. Other people are avoiding that market entirely. In my opinion, the market for PMG graded Disney dollars is too esoteric. I would not touch it with a 10-foot pole for long-term investing. Now, if you are flipping those items, if you know the market by and large, and you can make money in that market over the short term, again, do you. But for somebody that's just coming into a market, wants to learn it, I would tell them to avoid that market entirely, whether those Disney dollars are graded or ungraded. It doesn't matter. It's too esoteric. It does not compare to a lot of other Disney collectibles that one could buy that do have a good potential to increase in value over the long term, meaning they will make a much better long-term investment overall. So I hope that helps. Next question. Sean, what criteria has to be met to start investing in real estate rental properties? Okay, real estate rental property investing, which is what I engage in. Some other YouTubers out there, if you guys watch Graham Stephan, if you guys watch Meet Kevin, even Rudy with Alpha Investments, he talks about real estate investing. They are involved in it as well. To get involved in that market, you must be, in my opinion, and in most others' opinion, financially established. Let me explain why. If you do not have the money to maintain a second property in addition to where you live, and you cannot afford to pay the mortgage on that particular property without someone renting that property out, you are already disqualified from being able to get into that market. Because you must understand, even if you own a rental property, it is very rare to have somebody pay and rent out that property over the long term to the point where you're never going to have any vacancy. Well, while you have a vacancy, you still have to pay the mortgage on that property. You have to pay the upkeep. You have to pay for repairs, electricity, the water bill, and the like. So as a result, you should be pretty close to being financially established if you are going to play in that proverbial pool. Now, that being said, some of you guys out there, you're married, you have significant others, you both work, you both make high incomes, meaning maybe you yourself make six figures, maybe your wife, your significant other, she makes 60, 70 grand. Maybe she's the one that's making the high income. I don't know. But if you're in that particular scenario, if you can get by with all your expenses, your mortgage payment, your car payments, your school loans, credit card debt, your upkeep, if that can be managed by one salary and you have enough on that second salary to buy a rental property, go into that market and comfortably pay all the expenses, then you can start investing in that market. Real estate's a great investment over the long term. You do not want to get into buying foreclosed properties. You don't want to get into flipping houses. You don't want to get into fixing up houses unless you have your own contracting business. If you have your own contracting business, it can be very profitable to go into the market, look for distressed houses, buy them, fix them up, either rent them out over the long term or even flip them. Aside from that, flipping houses is not going to be for you overall. The way you make money in real estate is by going out there, buying a real estate property, holding it for 30 years, and in that time, your goal is to get somebody in that property who is trustworthy, who's not going to tear that property up, who will continue to pay the mortgage for you. And on that mortgage payment that they're paying you, you should also be making enough profit to be able to handle the upkeep of the property and also give you a little bit of a cushion every month, maybe $100, $200 on average. So that's how you get into that market. It is a very hard market to get into if you are not already financially established, if you do not have a significant other, a wife. Like somebody like me, I have multiple streams of income. so I can get into that market. A lot of YouTubers out there, they have multiple streams of income. I run a consulting business. I'm in the antiques collectibles trade. I have income, dividends, interest from investments that are hitting me. So it makes sense for me to go into that realm. However, 10, 15 years ago, I was not ready to go into that realm. This is a fairly recent trend for me. And I will tell you, handling properties, handling real estate investing is almost a full-time job in itself. I actually started going through a property management company, so that way I don't have to do a lot of the work myself. And if you can find a trustworthy property management company that only takes like 2, 3, 4% per year, you are better off doing that than doing it yourself, in my opinion, because they know all the tricks of the trade. They know how to screen applicants properly, so you're not wasting your time. So I hope that helps. It is a very, very nuanced market to get into. It can either be paradise, or it can be a headache, or it can be a nightmare. And sometimes it's a combination of all three. I'm going to be 100% honest. So that's how I would answer that. Next question. Sean, what do you think about collecting vinyl records, specifically first issues of popular or rare albums? Not talking about recent releases that are artificially limited. Do you think there is potential for that market to become established like first edition books? I would never put it at that degree. Let me give you an example. I own a first edition copy of The Great Gatsby. If I sold that today, I would literally make tens of thousands of dollars on that sale. Because when I bought it, not too many people were in the market for a first edition copy of The Great Gatsby. Today, thanks to the rise of the popularity of the story, the movie that came out in 2012 that starred Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire, there's a lot of people that want to get that book, so demand has risen. I would not put vinyl records, even if they are from the classic rock era, whatever age we're talking about, on the same par as collectible first edition books. Don't get me wrong. Certain vinyl records and music collectibles are established, but they are not on the mature side of the trade because tastes change. It's just like many years ago. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. Do you guys remember phonographs, vintage antique phonographs? Well, many, many years ago, they were selling for a significant premium on the secondary market. Today, those significant premiums had dissipated to the point where there's not a lot of people are going after vintage and antique phonographs anymore. People want instead, obviously, vintage rock albums from the 1960s, like the Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Queen, other popular artists. So as a result, the market for vintage and antique phonographs almost literally destabilized literally within the last few years. That's not to say you can't make money in that market, but it is not as established as the market for 60s and 70s iconic rock albums. So that too shall change in the future. So I would not compare vinyl records by and large with collectible first edition books. Those are two different collecting markets. As a matter of fact, if you don't believe me, log on to Heritage, log on to Swan Auction Galleries, and just look at the completed prices of some of these first edition books. You're going to be amazed. I mean, some of them that literally went for just $5,000 to $10,000 in the last 10, 20 years are now selling for close to six figures. It's unreal in certain instances. I mean, even me, I'm blown away with the value of them overall. That has happened to a lesser extent in vinyl records, but it's not that pronounced. And it's not going to be a long-term trend. You need to understand that. So those markets are inherently different. That said, vinyl records, if you buy right, they are an established collecting category. So you can do okay over the next 5, 10, 15 years. It's just we don't know what's going to happen 20, 30 years out. That's the big unknown. Where with collectible first edition books, I can pretty much guarantee you 20, 30, 40 years from now, someone's going to want my first edition copy of The Great Gatsby because that book is still taught in high school, it's taught in college, and it has a universal story and a universal lesson to it. Basically, the lesson is, I'll tell you guys and spoil it for you, don't get involved with cluster B disordered women. That's the story. Pretty much Daisy in that book, if you know the story, she could pretty much be diagnosed with histrionic or borderline personality disorder. Tom Buchanan, her husband, obviously has narcissistic personality disorder. So that's a great book that kind of teaches an interesting story to both men and women. That's why I like it. It has a universal appeal to that particular story. Enough on that. Let's go to the next question. Sean, at what point does a collectible become vintage? Okay, this is a very, very tricky question, and let me explain why. Vintage is actually referring to a period in time, a period in history. I did a video several months back on the differences between these terms and how a lot of the terms antique, collectible, retro, vintage, collectible, they're all pretty much buzzwords, but they do have some significant meanings. Go back and check that video out and you will find what you are looking for. But vintage by and large denotes a time period or a piece of clothing or a style in general. It does not denote an actual time frame when something becomes known as vintage, meaning 20, 30, 40 years later. That's not how that works. It's actually a time-specific time frame compared to the style in question. Same thing with retro. Retro is like that as well. Those particular terms confuse a lot of people because they're overused buzzwords in the trade. They actually do have meaning. Again, go back, hunt through my previous videos, and watch that video. It's stated specifically in the title of that video. You can't miss it. I will tell you, though, I almost have 200 videos uploaded to this channel at present time, so you will have to sift through a lot of them until you find it. I think it was done literally 6 or 7 months ago, if that helps. So it's not going to be at the top. It'll probably be in the mid to lower section of the videos that I have uploaded. Excellent question. Sean, what are your top 5 collectible purchases that have increased in value the most? I'm not going to name specific items or examples because I don't want to affect the market. I'm going to be 100% honest. I will tell you this. Most of the items that appreciate the most for me are on 2 extremes of the trade. Either they're on the pop culture side because I do play in a lot of the speculative markets like Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, vintage video games, graded video games, toys, comic books, and the like. But on the other side of the equation, I'm also hardcore involved in traditional antiques, vintage advertising, glass bottles, Tiffany glass, art pottery, coins, hint, 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 currency, firearms, edged weapons, collectible first edition books, artwork, historical documents. I'll give you some examples in general. A lot of coins that I have owned throughout the years because I know how to analyze that market have appreciated very well. So as a result, I will sometimes utilize a numismatic coin dealer that I trust to go to the market and find me some of these coins. Those particular items have appreciated very well. Same with certain pieces of currency that I have owned, certain pieces of artwork that I have owned and sold, believe it or not, and also other more traditional antiques like glass bottles, art glass, items of that nature. On the collectible side of the trade, I did very well with my vintage CGC graded comic book collection. I sold half of it, and I think the collection sold for a grand total of something like $60,000 or $70,000 when it was sold through Heritage back in 2015, 2016. I made a lot of money on that, so I am involved in that market to a certain degree. I did fairly well on my vintage toy collection, although not as much as I would have liked to. That's basically due to the risks in that market, as I've talked about in other videos, where those items were not meant to be stored for the long term. So as a result, I did have some losses in that market as well. I have also done well in esoteric markets. I'll give you a prime example. Back in 1998, 1999, I was at a well-known flea market in my area. I'm not going to say which one. And I stumbled upon a glass bottle that I had reason to believe the dealer who was selling it was not listing it as properly as it was. Well, lucky at the time, I knew one of my mentors in the trade was massively into bottle collecting, and he could pretty much identify anything in that market. This guy had a collection that was later sold for like $2 million. He was very wealthy. So I bought this particular bottle for $100 and I took it to him, and it turns out the dealer at that particular flea market actually listed that item incorrectly, and I consigned it to an auction. Actually, he did on my behalf, and it sold for something like $12,500. So most of my finds are always usually on the antique side of the trade that sell for a significant amount of money. Now, one thing you got to understand, guys, I've been operating in these markets since the age of 12. I've had a lot of mentors who have given me guidance in these markets. These are sophisticated markets. I would never advise the average person out there to get involved in collecting glassware or ancient coins without having an understanding of the market, because it can take decades to learn these markets. Even me, I'm learning new stuff each and every day when I get involved in these markets. I'm just lucky where I always had the people who were willing to help me that I could go to if I had a question. So that's how I benefited. But overall, for the average person, I'm going to be very honest. You guys right now, if you're investing in Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, and you're doing it in the short term, you can still make money in those markets. Do I recommend it for the long term? No, it's inherently risky at that point. So I hope that answers your question. And that is going to be the last question for this segment of part 3 of the 3,500 subscriber Q&A series. Please stay tuned for part 4. Thanks for watching and have a great night.